Hi, welcome to another video brought to you by turbocamaro.ca. Today we're going to be doing a valve seal replacement while the engine and head are still in the car. Now you can see here I've got the valve cover off already. I'm going to assume that you can get yourself at least that far. I'm by no means a master mechanic here, but I do want to show you how I'm doing this. I've already been successful at replacing the seals in cylinder number 1, so I'm going to do cylinder number 2 next. Now how I'm going to go about doing this, I'm going to use the rope method, and that basically involves pulling all the spark plugs, pulling the valve cover. I've loosened all of the nuts here for the studs, and now I'm just going to insert a rope into the cylinder that I'm going to be doing next, which is going to be cylinder number 2. What that does is that you basically lower that particular piston, and then when it gets down you fill the cylinder with this rope, nylon rope, and then you rotate the engine back up, and it causes the rope to come up and basically press up against the bottom of the valves. So it prevents the valves from falling inside the cylinder onto the top of the piston, so that you don't have to take the head off. Now, I could take the head off, but this engine is new, but I encountered some issues. The valve seals that I used actually in a previous video were not the correct valve seals. They were umbrella seals, which is fine, but didn't have the correct clearance for the valve guides that I have. And I'll show you. This is what happens when you use something with incorrect clearance. You can see the valve seal there is supposed to be a nice little umbrella, but has been completely chewed up by the valve springs getting too close and just grinding off chunks. Now I found like little chunks like this inside the valve cover, so not the greatest situation for a new engine. Clearly a flub on my part. I should have thought about that, and I should have used the correct seals. So what I'm going to do is go right back to the stock cover, the shroud here for the tops of the valve springs, and with the original O-ring style seal, as much as they're not the performance application, they will work for this. And then someday when the valves are replaced for a more performance head job, I'll be able to replace the seals with some kind of a open seal or something like that. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to put the rope in cylinder number 2, and I will get this in position. Alright, so with the rope fed into cylinder number 2, I made sure to rotate the engine clockwise so that it got tight, and then once you get that to that point, you can remove the first of your 2 springs. In this case, I removed the intake spring. It's already done, but I just got it sitting here to show you. Just as a point of interest, I made sure I used a clean rope. Also, the ends were kind of fraying on my rope, so I just took a cigarette lighter to it and just melted it so that there was no debris or little bits of the nylon going into the engine bay. I made sure that this wouldn't just pop off either in a little chunk. So get that so that you're pretty confident you're not going to be leaving anything behind. And then go ahead and remove the first spring. So you basically wind it down with whatever tool you have. You can then lift it off with it connected. In this case I can. And now I'm just done with my collection of stuff, and I'm left with just my valve seal. Now this one here, I'm sure it's going to be just like the others. Good idea to check that your valve isn't going to drop. The seal is kind of helping hold it there. In this case, I can feel it bottoming out on the rope there, so I can take this off, and I'll double check. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. And now I can pull this thing off. You can see it's literally destroyed. Like, it's causing more harm than good, really. I mean, obviously it's helping, but unfortunately I would have only gone so much longer before those would have just completely disintegrated. There's even like little chunks like this in the valve cover area, which is really bad. So I'm gonna have to make sure I do a great job, very thorough job of cleaning all this out. But now I've got that off of there. This is sitting there. Now that's not gonna be high enough to put on the new seal and then put the new spring on. I'll have to make sure this gets tight. So I may need to move the rope around, maybe feed a bit more in there and tighten it up some more. But I'll get that nice and tight, and we'll assemble the new spring with the proper height. Alright, so we're all set up here. So you can see here that these are the retainers that I was using, the ones that are currently in the car. Now, they're fine, there's nothing wrong with them, or the locks that they came with, but the issue is I need to use this. It's basically a shroud, or technically I think it's called a shedder. And what it does is that you use the stock retainer and you put it over top of the shedder, and it gives you basically like an umbrella seal on the very top of the spring, and then that allows any oil that comes off of the rocker arm to just drip over the edge and down. Now there'll obviously be a slight amount that will get in, and that's just fine. And then what happens is the O-ring, which are these right here, they go almost perfectly underneath, or they even mesh up against the underside of the retainer, and that provides a seal so that any oil that goes in through, that tries to go through the lock, will just get basically pooled and then drip over. So some will get through, and that's what's expected, but this is the idea. So it's a very old design that works fine, but I have to switch to it. So to do that, I have to use these new retainer, or the old retainers, and the shedder. Now the interesting thing is that these ones I was using with the original locks were only giving me about, I had to reduce about 50 thousandths of an inch to make the installed height. These together, since you can see how beastie that is 150. It's quite a bit. It's a significant amount to come off. So say for instance I measured and I was at 1.8 inches high. I had to take 100.150 off of that with this instead of just 0.05. So it's quite a significant amount to change. So to do that and still be able to use the new springs and with that particular installed height, I had to invest in some different locks. Now these locks are Howard cams. They're supposed to be 60 or 50 or 60 I think higher. So 60.06 increase. Now that brings this to not as beastie as it was. It's still high, but that's fine because most of my valves were just fine to begin with, but there was a couple that required a little bit more height. I'm not sure if I've got some different valves and some Mickey Mouse stuff, so what can you do? Either way, what I want to do now is basically mock up the valve stem as it is with the original style retainer and the new 60 over locks and measure my height. I'm going to do that with the depth part of this digital caliper. It's not as accurate as an actual micrometer for valve spring height. However, it does allow me to get the measurement that I need. And you can see here as I go down, this sticks down. So I just got to essentially stick this at the top of the retainer and measure down to the basically the guide, or whatever you want to call it, the bottom of the guide area where the shims will go, and I can get my height. For instance, something like this would be what I would probably see, about that high, and then I can minus 150 off of that and then figure out exactly which shim size I need. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I measured the height there, and I got, on the first go with the larger locks, I got 1.98. Now that is quite a bit higher than needed. So if you minus the 150 for the shedder and the retainer off of that, you're left with needing I needed over 100 basically to get the required. So I needed 100 were the shims, and shims come in 15s, 30s, 60s, and you can get custom sizes too. But I got these spacer things. They're original. They could just be squeezed, but my caliper says that they're about 25-ish. So that's fine. Either way, so what I did is I just took the larger locks out, and then I remeasured with the original just stock locks, and I get myself basically 1.9 instead of the 1.98, which doesn't sound like a big difference, but in the world of valve spring height, it's massive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the stock locks on this particular valve, which then lead me to need about 20 to 25. So it's perfect. I'm going to use one of these just stock shims here for the bottom. There's this basically a little plate for the bottom, and that will all I'll need for this particular valve. So I'll go ahead and just basically put that in position now. Still got the retainer there. Keeping in mind, they do have little lines on the bottom of them. The lines usually go down, and then usually, or sometimes, it says this side up. So now that's that. Now the basically spring can be compressed on there with the new retainer and the shedder, and at the same time I can put a lubed up O-ring in the second groove of the valve stem, and then it's just a matter of essentially reassembling the spring on there to sound. And before I finish this here, I just want to go over a couple things here, a couple tips, if you will. This is just a regular spring compressor tool. It's probably 15-20 bucks at the local auto store. It's fine. It does the job. It's painful. I was hoping to just get this assembled when I built the engine and never have to do it again with this because of just how ridiculous it is. However, it does do the job. Now, I have learned over doing this so many times now of some tricks that make it just a little bit easier. Basically, the way I like to do it is for my springs, my configuration, maybe yours too, I don't know. What I do is at the bottom of the spring here, you can see it maybe right there. It's the end of the spring, at the very bottom at the end, it just ends. In my case, always put at the face, so right in the middle of this tool, so that when I'm looking at the tool when it connected, that is basically in the middle of it all, and that almost always, if not always, is the best possible spot for it to not come flying off on your hand and not cause any kind of major injury. Now I've already got this kind of sort of tightened, so it's difficult for me to do, but that's the general idea. If you compress it like that, I'm not going to tell you it's not going to come off on your hand, because it might. Now I'm not working with super harsh, heavily compressed springs here. They're not racing springs or anything, so it's not as likely to hurt me as much as it would, somebody with those type of springs, but that's something to think about. Also, what I do is I like to compress the spring, and then because I have this type of tool, I can actually lift the spring compressed right off very briefly and allow me to put the O-ring on. That way, when I'm compressing it, if I had the O-ring on the valve first, I might actually damage the O-ring just compressing the spring and moving things around and stuff. So that way I can quickly take the spring off, slide the O-ring on to the valve with it oiled, and then to slip the compressed spring back over and then pop the valve locks on, and then I can just remove the tool. Obviously easier said than done. This is kind of a lengthy process with just having to go step by step, but doing it that way, I haven't been hurt yet. I've never had this thing pop off on me once I figured this out, and it seems to work pretty well, even though it is kind of a laborious task. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to this valve now. And now that's that. So I've gone ahead and just basically put the keepers in and raised the valve spring back up, and that's it. It's nice and tight. Then I can move on to the next one. And that's all I need. So this spring adjustment for me was to 1 and 730 or 725. The spring shop or the machine shop said that the 730 for me would be just fine. So I can go ahead and just continue with that now. That may be totally different for you. Your cam card or whatever might be totally different. It almost likely will be. So but for this particular engine, if you get the Tom Lowe springs, at least the ones that he has right now, they are supposed to be set to that height, and I seem to be able to do that no problem with his stock or his supplied parts. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the rest of these now, maintaining that same height with exactly the same process, and we'll see what it looks like when it's done. All right, so it's all done. You can see here, these are the seals that I took off, all of them, and some of them are just like, they're just destroyed. They were doing nothing for me. Like I said earlier, anything, they were putting debris into the engine and maybe causing me problems. I'm gonna have to do an oil change right away now just to make sure I'm not running this through the oil pump. Either way, this is what it looks like when it's done as far as the actual seal part of it goes. I need to go ahead and do all the lifter adjustments in order to get this thing running again. But there's a separate video I've made for that if you're interested. Something to think about as you're going along, even though I just did my engine a couple weeks ago, it's some of the locks for the retainers were very difficult to get loose. So what I ended up doing was just taking a socket like this, sticking it on the top of the keeper, the retainer, and then just hitting it fairly gently with a hammer, just a couple times. You can actually hear it free up and then the locks won't be stuck. That's pretty much the only tip you need. It's a time-consuming process doing it like this. I found the rope part of it to be very tricky, especially for this engine. Putting in the one cylinder and having the two valves, it's fine, but it's just the length of the motor having to reach all the way back there was quite difficult. And then sometimes the rope wouldn't be perfectly under a particular valve, and the valve would wiggle up and down, and that made it tough to seat the locks. So I ended up using a flathead and just sort of prying up a little bit on the groove for the retainer and the locks. So just trying to get the valve all the way up, just very tricky. Just take your time, have a few beer, do it in a hot sunny afternoon or whatever. Maybe even bring a friend over to help hold various tools and stuff. But that's it. If you have any questions about how this was done, or if you want to have any information, please let me know in the comment section below. All as well, please subscribe on YouTube for more videos. I have lots of videos coming, and you can find us under Turbo Camaro on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you for watching.